How do you have great sex over a lifetime, especially in the context of a long-term relationship? For many of us, that feels like an impossible task. It's hard enough to make sense of yourself, your own sex drive, your own turn-ons, and even harder when you bring that into a partnership. Sure, it's easier in the beginning. Passion feels effortless, but as the years go on, boredom creeps in, responsibilities pile up, and one day you realize it's been 6 months, maybe even longer, since you've even touched each other. And the reality is, you're listening to this right now because you desperately want to avoid that being your fate. Maybe you've tasted the passion of a new relationship and you want to hold on to it for as long as you can. Or you're in a sexless marriage, starting to wonder if monogamy itself is even natural. And here's the thing, you're not alone. Recent studies show that nearly half the population is starting to question whether monogamy really works. And up to 75% of couples report sexual boredom in long-term relationships. And in an age full of grifters and half-truths, the last thing we need is another hot take. What we need is someone who's actually done the work, someone who's seen up close what keeps passion alive and what kills it, which is why we sat down with Dr. Snyder, one of the legends in the field of sex. He's both a physician and a sex therapist trained to understand the body, the mind, and the erotic connection between them. With over 35 years in practice, he's written the best-selling book, Love Worth Making, which earned praise from nearly all of his peers. And what he's observed over decades is that there are unspoken rules when it comes to great sex. In straight relationships, many of those rules circle back to what some might call traditional gender roles, not in the sense of power imbalances, control, or outdated social hierarchies, but in the erotic sense of initiation, desire, and pursuit. And perhaps the most surprising part, many of the people most drawn to these dynamics proudly identify as feminists and are confused when their sexual desires don't neatly align with their other beliefs. If you're new to Mighty Pursuit, we exist to help you make sense of the whole person, mind, body, and spirit, not as vague wellness cliches, but as deeply interconnected parts of your everyday experience. We believe putting the whole person back together is the key to living well. In today's episode, we're zooming into our sex category, exploring what it takes to keep passion alive over a lifetime. Because nuance is our highest value, we want to approach this topic in a way that truly accounts for all its complexity. Dr. Snyder is a fourth sex therapist we've had on this podcast, and we integrate his learnings with the insights of the others, treating each as part of a larger puzzle we're piecing together to see the whole truth. And by the end of this conversation, you may never look at your sex life the same way again. There were two stories in your book I was very intrigued by. They struck me partially because they felt like archetypes in a way of what we see in society and the way that people think about sex, love, and relationships. One was a couple you observed in the subway, and they had something of a sexual aura about them. And the other was a client who showed up in your office after 15 years, and she was sexually bored in a marriage and contemplating an affair. So I thought that would be a good starting point. Can you unpack those two stories for us and what you feel like they reveal about sex itself?
Okay. All right. That's a big one. I was bringing my kids back from the beach, Brighton Beach. It was connected to the Upper West Side by the B train. So it was a Sunday afternoon. We were very tired coming back from the beach with the beach toys and the blankets and the kids fetching and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I happened to notice there's this couple. They look like in their 20s, and they're just, dressed in beach clothes. And they're sharing an iPhone headset, and they've kind of got their hands on each other. She's got her arms on his shoulders. He's got her hands on her hips, and they're not doing anything inappropriately, but they just have this look. There's this kind of goofy, what I call in my office, the dumb and happy look. They look dumb and happy. They're kind of giggly and goofy, and they're obviously turned on. And I notice the kids are oblivious, of course, but the adults on the train are all looking at this couple because there's something about that look which is just entrancing, captivating. And so, when I got interested in writing about, the emotional aspects of sex, which is what my book is about, couldn't find it anywhere. I couldn't find a book about the emotional aspects of sex, so I figured I had to write it. So when I get interested in writing about this, I thought to myself, let me unpack the emotional aspects of sex. And we talked about, you're absorbed in the experience. Everything else is like, oh, I'll take care of that later. You're not that interested. Phone rings. You don't really care who's calling. You just want them to go away. And ideally, you're kind of regressed to a little more infantile level, where your adult coping capacities are not there 100%. Your great sex really makes you very, very stupid. And also there's something very validating about it. So that the transformation of the ordinary mind into the sexually aroused mind, that was what I was interested in. Masters and Johnson, back in the 1960s, they studied the sexually aroused body, kind of mapped that. But nobody's really talked about the sexually aroused mind and exactly what happens, but it's kind of part of the programming. So, I thought to myself, this is a couple who's in public and they're not doing anything inappropriate, but they're aroused. That's really, really interesting because you can kind of see it, and it looks like they're going to miss their subway stop. And so I decided that's kind of an acid test for whether you're really aroused on a subway, whether you're going to miss your stop. So I went on talking about everybody else on the train, what's going on with them. We don't really know because, it's behind closed doors and nobody really knows what anybody else's sex life is really like unless they come to see me or another sex therapist. And I thought to myself, this couple, 10 years from now, if they stay together, if they're lugging kids' toys back from the beach, what's their arousal going to look like? And unfortunately, for most couples, it is something wanting about it. And I know this because I'm a sex therapist and I hear about all the disappointment, frustration, and so forth, and the lack of enthusiasm and inspiration people. And so in my view, the main thing you need in order to hold on to that sense of inspiration, that ability to get dumb and happy, is to know what you're going for. Unfortunately, too many couples, probably the majority of couples, only get into that dumb and happy state, if they get into it at all, when they're going to have sex, which is a waste because you should get into it on the train too. All right, you miss your stop every once in a while, but that's okay. You should get into it in a restaurant. You should get into it whenever you can. Sex therapy, we call that simmering. You should simmer all the time. Whenever you kiss your partner, you should simmer them. Otherwise, you're wasting it. So the one is to keep in mind what you're going for, because unfortunately, most couples want to be efficient about it. And so they, the kids are asleep and they get into bed and okay, well, let's make sure we both have orgasms and then we'll fall asleep. And unfortunately, as you know from reading my book, there's like the high road to orgasm and then there's the low road to orgasm. And for most couples, it's kind of the low road. They're not really that excited. They didn't get really dumb and happy. Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to do is to convey to people that that's really what you're going for. That's the heart and soul of it. And if you have that in mind, if you know that that's what you're going for, then you don't settle for anything less, and you're usually okay.
That example is what people honestly strive for. I mean, you mentioned the people that are looking at them entranced by their entrancement.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are looking for that kind of sexual magic, especially they might associate a new relationship with that type of sexual magic and it coming automatically. But then the second example of a client showing up in your office 15 years later, I'm sexually bored, considering an affair, is kind of what they fear. The average person's fear is like being in that situation. So can you share about that second?
Sure. Well, the first thing about her, I had seen her 15 years before with her husband for some other issues, which we can talk about later maybe. And then she comes back, which is a wonderful thing about being in practice for 30 or 40 years, is people come back and you see what the results are like. And she says, it's okay, but I'm really bored. And this is something gets discussed a lot in the popular press these days, especially in feminist circles, because you hear this a lot and there's lots of evidence for it that women especially are much more likely to get bored in a sexual relationship than a guy. Guys' needs tend to be kind of simple. They kind of like the way their partners put together. They kind of like to look at them and feel them and hold them and have sex with them. Women, it's a different kind of prospect because women tend to look for a little more sensual variety in lots of things. I always joke that the three necessities of life, food, clothing, and shelter, women eroticize all three of them. Food, I go out to dinner with my kids. They're in their 20s now. My daughter will take a picture of the dessert and show it to all her friends, and they're all oohing and eyeing. My son is never going to take a picture of the dessert. But I watch these romance things with my wife sometimes on the Hallmark Channel and so forth just to relax. And the guy, the romantic lead is often a chef. or a restaurant or something like that. There's often food. Women are erotically involved with food. Clothing, fashion, say no more. And shelter, they're interested in interior design and decorating and stuff. The average guy just wants to put up his feet, and have a beer and read the paper and watch a ball game. He's really fine. He can do the same thing over and over again. But she's been in it 15 years and she's going out of her mind with boredom in the way that a lot of women do in my office. And they say, it's the same thing every time. It's just the same thing. And so what they've been doing is they've been experimenting with solutions that you hear about these days. Let's go on a sexy vacation. Let's buy a new sex toy. Let's watch porn together. And she says, it's not doing anything. And so the message that I really want to give her is your problem is that you're searching outward. You're looking for novelty, which is never going to last. The sexual mind obviously loves novelty because it's childlike and infantile, and children love new things. You give a kid a bunch of new toys, he's going to love them. But you see what happens to those toys after 2 weeks? They're just shoved in the corner and nobody plays with them anymore. It's the same thing with adults. So what I tell her is your problem is you've been looking outward. And instead, you really would do a lot better to look inward. So what does that mean? So the new wave in sex therapy is mindfulness. And mindfulness is just a new name for a very, very old concept. And the old concept is that there are two, as many of your viewers probably know, there are two basic activities of the human mind. There's thinking and doing, which is what we're doing right now. And then there's what happens if you kind of get less involved with thinking and doing, is to one degree or another, you experience awareness. Because thinking and doing makes you less aware usually. Mm-hmm. So if you just, this like in the Eastern religions where they kind of do that stuff, that's not so big in the Western tradition. And so what I usually suggest for couples is called a two-step. And people think it's a country dance, and I go, no, it's not a country dance. So the step one is simply to cultivate awareness, not even sexual. Your partner might not even be there. Or if a couple is in bed together, I tell them, go to bed together and do absolutely nothing. Just lie there and do absolutely nothing. Just what are you aware of? You're not aware of my body. I take a breath. I'm aware of the temperature in the room. I'm aware of what's going on around. And so you're just in a state of awareness, and most people find something pleasant and welcome. And it turns out that state of awareness is where all the good stuff happens. The couple on the train in a new relationship with a lot of novelty and a lot of other stuff, which we can talk about, automatically generates that state of awareness. You get into that state of awareness and you're just not as concerned about phone calls or anything else. Later on, it's a conscious willingness to enter into that state of awareness. It has nothing to do with desire, because there's a million books that have been written about how to cultivate desire. There's a book called Hot Monogamy, and there's books about, this and that, and how to sex it up and so forth. And I think it's all garbage. I don't even think about desire at all. I say, we just chuck desire. I don't care how horny you are. I don't care whether you're feeling desire. I just want you in bed cultivating a state of awareness. And that state of awareness, as I mentioned, is where all the good stuff happens. And then once you're in a state of awareness, again, consciously, willingly, you turn to your partner, and assuming you've selected a mate who you basically like how they're put together and what they're like, and you just experience them. And so you're just going to experience your partner in a state of awareness. And this is all the way back to Masters and Johnson in the 60s. The best sex therapy recommendations have always involved mindfulness and awareness to some extent.
That's such a different approach than what you would typically hear. I mean, you mentioned the thing about porn and sex toys and all these other ways to kind of try to rekindle a sexual relationship. And what you're saying, people probably haven't heard before. I think their mindset might be, of course it gets boring. Of course, that's a natural progression of a relationship. But do you feel like if someone's listening, that is the natural progression of a relationship automatically, or that has to do with a number of different factors that would influence that being the end destination of boredom, even in the first place of getting there?
Somebody once told me something, that the boredom is seldom a primary emotion. It's very often the product of something else. And sometimes boredom is a product of feeling like you should be the passive recipient of something and you're not getting it.
There's so many things that influence, it feels like, the baseline of a relationship, right? So if there are illness, or if there is 80-hour work weeks, or a tremendous amount of stress, conflict, all sorts of extenuating circumstances, what would you say to someone who is like, it would be unrealistic to sustain this through the course of a relationship over time due to the number of factors that we're hit with? Because there's kind of like a innocence of a new relationship, in the sense that they don't know that much about you. Maybe it is that kind of happy dopey thing in the beginning.
Sure.
You haven't really faced anything hard. And that it stands at contrast of decades with someone going through a whole wide range of stuff.
I mean, I hear it from couples all the time. Did you get a chance to have those experiences we talked about? No, we were really tired. We were too busy. It's garbage. Because you don't really need a lot of time. There's a technique I talk about in the book, which we mentioned at the beginning, called simmering, where just anytime you might kiss your partner, simmer them instead. Hold them a little bit longer. Look deeply into their eyes. Feel their body. Breathe together. Maybe reach a hand inside their clothing, and just experience. And that takes a minute. It's very easy to do when you're kissing your partner goodbye in the morning if they're leaving, or when you're kissing them goodnight. A lot of people, unfortunately, have this idea that when you get sexually excited, it's like something painful or difficult. You've got to do the equivalent of taking Motrin to get rid of it. And that something is to have an orgasm. A lot of women, unfortunately, honestly, a lot of women sex therapists I've talked to, they still have this idea that if a guy gets hard, if you're responsible by being sexy for a guy getting hard, you have to do something about it. You have to take care of it, by giving him an orgasm. And I always tell them, no, we like this. We like this. It's a pleasurable state. It's like a dog wagging its tail. It just means we're happy. So, a lot of times in my office with women, you have to tell them, no, it's fine. It's fine. If he gets so excited, it's okay. You don't have to do anything about it. So, get excited for a minute before you fall asleep, and then you fall asleep. And so it raises the erotic temperature in the relationship. So if you're just doing that, or that is to say, if you don't stop doing that, then usually you're okay. And most couples, we know the statistics, most couples these days, committed couples, are having sex about once a week, which is like half of what it was 30 years ago. So
really, it's went down that much?
Oh my God, yes. We're in a tremendous sex recession, which is really paradoxical if you look at how things are all sexed up in the media and so forth. But in the bedroom, a tremendous sex recession. And there are probably lots of reasons for it, and we talk about it. But the average couple has sex about once a week. And unfortunately, that's kind of the minimum. To a sex therapist, that's the minimum for keeping a sexual connection with somebody long term. Once a week, below once a week, you kind of get in trouble. And sooner or later, you're having sex once a month or quarterly or yearly, and it's just no good.
So you think there's an actual cadence to how often you're having sex?
As human beings, I think if you're having sex less than once a week, it becomes to feel like kind of not a part of the relationship, or not a big part of the relationship. So what I tell couples is, don't even worry about having sex, just get excited. Because if you're having sex just once a week, like most couples are, just on the weekends, say, then you're going to rely on that other stuff, all that simmery kind of stuff of getting excited, in order to keep the erotic temperature to a good level. Because otherwise, a lot of couples avoid doing any of that stuff because they don't want to get the other person excited for fear the other person will get frustrated. And I go, it's okay, let them get a little frustrated, it's okay. But obviously, most couples don't know this. 90% of couples don't simmer. I mean, it's my back of the hand estimate. Because they don't want to frustrate each other. So the memo, I've written articles about this all over. I was on Today's Show talking about this. Just please, you got to keep doing this. Don't stop.
Well, I think the thing that is interesting about what you're proposing with the simmering thing and then the two-step is it seems almost like that effort initially even isn't not the simmering, but the two-step isn't even erotic necessarily to begin with. You're just sitting.
Step one is not erotic.
Yeah. So you're going into bed and you're just sitting there, which doesn't really require that much effort. But are people already in a state when they go to bed at night where does that count as the first step, or there's something,
no, usually
there's an intentionality behind it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, they want to sleep. Usually they're going to bed to sleep, and they're checking their emails or they're checking their phone, or, they check their emails, nothing good. They check their phone, nothing good. They go on Apple News. Oh, maybe there's something interesting. Before long, they spent 20 minutes, scrolling and so forth. And their partner's doing the exact same thing. And when they wake up in the morning, usually they're looking at their devices before they even look at each other. So that's, probably one of the reasons that sex has gone down to once a week when it used to be twice a week 30 years ago.
Do you feel like why do all these things seem like they come more naturally in the beginning of a relationship for people? And people look at that as a sign of relationship help or passion in a relationship. And it's almost like you're riding a wave and then the wave just goes
Well,
off.
I believe that it's automatic in the beginning of a relationship. I believe there's the potential all times in a relationship, but it's not automatic. It has to be really an act of conscious willingness later on, because you're not going to have desire most of the time. So like I say in the book, you just throw desire out. I'm really not interested in whether you have desire or not. I'm interested in, are you conscious and willing to get into an experience which is going to involve a sanctification on some kind of level of the relationship in a emotional and physical way, putting those things together in a very deep way, and obviously spiritual as well. And what couple would ever say no to that? Because it's a very important thing. So in the beginning of the relationship, it's automatic. And that's where a lot of people get fooled, because they expect that automaticity. And so that just doesn't happen later on. It's not automatic. So probably one of the reasons, I'm getting into kind of teleology here, but one of the reasons it's automatic is because at the beginning of a relationship, it's a little bit like mother-infant bonding. You need a lot of reassurance. A couple will have sex, 3, 4, or 5 times a week. And every time they have sex, they're going, okay, was it good? Are we still good? Okay, we're still good. And they're getting a tremendous amount of reassurance in that, because it's highly reassuring that you're still together and connected in all those different kinds of ways. Later on, you don't really need that reassurance in the same way. You've got a mortgage together. You've got kids together. Your partner, as far as you know, more or less high degree of probability, they're not going anywhere. So you don't really need the reassurance, because you have the reassurance from so many other places. Whereas in the beginning of a relationship, sex is one of the main sources of reassurance you have. So I guess we could put it that when you don't need it for reassurance, when you don't need sex for reassurance as much, then it has to become a conscious willingness to do that.
Yeah, you had this interesting sort of chart or graph in your book of stages of arousal,
right?
And moving through. Can you explain that? Because I think it's an important concept to understand. Even if you're starting at a 0 with arousal, of how this kind of two-step process would move somebody through to a higher state.
So in order to do that, we have to talk about orgasms. Because a definition I use in the book of a sex therapist, this is the only person in the world who's not interested in orgasms. Because as sex therapists, everybody comes into us worrying about orgasms. And we say, no, it's not about the orgasms. It's about how aroused you got. And obviously the two are connected, because people, man or woman, have an orgasm threshold of, like, say, arousal is from 0 to 100, and it's roughly the opposite of IQ. So at 0, you have all your IQ points, and at 100, you're just absolutely on a spinal level. You have no IQ at all. And nobody ever gets to 100 because they usually have an orgasm first. So if you're a guy, most guys, let's say your threshold is around a 40. So you get to around a 40 and it's in danger of the thing being over in just a second for a guy. And in most women is a little higher. Let's say it's a 50 or a 60. There are obviously exceptions. It's generalization. And so it's very, very important to be conscious of how aroused you are. And to a sex therapist, sex is a little bit like a meal. You have your appetizers, and ideally, it's like a really fine restaurant, and you're involved with the appetizers. You're not even thinking about what you ordered for the main course. And you think, oh, these are delicious appetizers. And then they bring around the main course, and you go, oh, I almost forgot. We have a main course. That's great. Now, for most couples, that's intercourse. And that's really the way to do it. You say, oh, we get to have intercourse too. Fabulous. And then you're just finishing off your main course and they bring around the dessert tray. That's orgasm. And you go, we get dessert too? That's fabulous. I love this place. So that's really the right way to do it. But unfortunately, most couples try to be more efficient about it. They kind of whip through the appetizers. They do the main course. They're just going for dessert. So I say, don't just do it to go dessert. You got to go through it. So in order to go through this in a meaningful way, you have to be really aware of how turned on you are. And the key concept is that for both men and women, physical manifestations of turn on, hardness and wetness, don't require a lot of arousal. So on a scale of 0 to 100, I mean, this is by back of the hand estimate, maybe a 20. It's like getting the car out of the driveway. Unfortunately, most couples trying to be efficient about it, she gets wet, he gets hard, and they go and do it. And they've missed the whole thing. They're on the low road to orgasm. It can still get an orgasm, but it's not really where you want to be. Where you want to be is what Masters and Johnson in the 1960s called plateau. As you may know, they had people come into their office and have sex with monitors attached, and they the heart rate and all sorts of stuff. And you get it to a point far beyond wetness and hardness where you really just kind of zoned out there and in just that dumb and happy state. And then after a while, the dessert cart arrives, and then the meal is over. So, want people to be attentive to whether they're really in that plateau experience. And when people remember great sex, like the greatest sex they've ever had in their life, usually that's what they're remembering, that they were in plateau. I don't know if many people that can remember the greatest orgasm, or even if they remember the greatest orgasm, they don't even remember exactly what it felt like. They're just momentary. But arousal, that's really kind of the ticket. That's the key.
Now, when it comes to sexual boredom and arousal and monogamy, we were talking about this idea of it being easier in earlier parts of relationship. Multiple studies show that nearly like half of people think that monogamy is sort of this outdated concept, and maybe they use their own feelings about how aroused they might be getting by something else versus their own relationship. So what do you think of kind of that mindset and those statistics?
Well, as a sex therapist, I'm a little doubtful about that, because it can work. I guess non-monogamy could work in different kind of societies, as it does work in different kinds of societies. Hunter-gatherer societies, many of them are non-monogamous, but they're not ownership societies. They don't have my house, my mortgage, my farmland, and so forth. That's a later development. That's 10,000 years old. So once you get an ownership society, people are oriented towards what's mine, and I've got my mortgage, and I'm going to be paying with this person. And unfortunately, as the non-monogamist will tell you, once you get into non-monogamy, you can't necessarily control it, because feelings can come and go, and you could get inspired by somebody else, and you can't necessarily completely protect your primary relationship. Yeah. And so things come to an end, and okay, who's going to raise the kids? Who's going to pay the mortgage? So in an ownership society, I don't think it really works real well. Unless you're very, very rich, and you can just take care of everything no matter what happens, or you're a senior citizen. It can work for senior citizens because they've kind of taken care of all their responsibilities. I've known a couple of groups of senior citizens who kind of play around. So I would say the next sexual revolution is going to be led by retirees. Yeah. But for young people in their most productive years, I think it's always going to be a bit of a curiosity and an oddity. That's my feeling, because as you and I have talked about this, you have to be an interesting kind of person in order to be a successful non-monogamist. You have to be kind of low on jealousy. which is not that common a trait. You have to be really, really interested in people. That is to say, you're interested in what's going on with you and your several partners and spending time with them, have a lot of time and interest and want to kind of hang out and find out how everybody's feeling. It requires a great deal of time and energy to be non-monogamous. And very few people, I joke and say, very few people in the 21st century have time and energy for one relationship. Now you talk about 2 or 3. This is almost beyond anything.
But yeah, I mean, when it comes to the compounding attachment bonds, even that you would need to manage. But I mean, it does seem like the space itself the sex therapy space is encouraging that route more often. Why do you think that is?
Oh, I think it's, like they say in journalism, there's dog bites a guy, that's not news. Guy bites a dog, that's news. I think this is guy bites dog. I think this is novelty. Everybody's turned on by novelty. Oh, non-monogamy, that's new. All right, so we'll have courses on it and so forth. BDSM, I mean, it's obviously not new, but it's only big, in the past couple of decades since there's porn. So, okay, well, now there's BDSM and stuff. These things, they're always around, but they become objects of fascination, I think, because they're novel and they're different. Unfortunately, I'm glad you asked about it because it reminds me of something. People think plain old vanilla relationships, especially plain old vanilla heterosexual relationships, are like, that's old. That's like dog bites man. We know everything we need to know about those relationships. And I would argue the opposite. I would say they're the toughest of all. And if they weren't so socially sanctioned, not as many people would do them because they're very, very challenging. Because, men and women, they don't really understand each other very well. Sometimes their aims and their goals are not exactly congruent. And they also are under the burden of expectations of what a heterosexual couple should be, which I call the conventional script and talk a lot about in the book. Lost a lot of publishers over it, actually, because they said I was reinforcing tired stereotypes. I said, look, I don't make the news. I just report it. I describe what I'm seeing in the office. So heterosexual relationships, I think, are a vast mine of untapped information that we don't have about what heterosexuality is really, really like.
I think people look at the non-monogamous type of arrangements or even thinking up these things is because they can't make sense of their own feelings and desires, and even a lot of the research and stuff that happens around cheating. So someone has been cheated on, or they feel like they want to cheat, and rather than just go out and do that and hide, like you said, it's like, well, this seems like a more logical option.
Yeah, the theory, the pure theory, is a noble theory, and I think it makes sense. Unfortunately, when you talk to people in these consensual non-monogamy communities, there's a lot of cheating. There's a lot of going against the agreement that you made. Wait a minute, I thought there was no intercourse, that was kind of thing. And so people are always breaking these boundaries because it's kind of a human tendency.
If you had to estimate from what you see in your practice, how often do people cheat? I mean, this is a really tough thing to nail down if you look at studies and stuff. But
because who's going to tell somebody in a study?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, you're talking to these people. So how often do you feel like that happens in relationships?
I wouldn't know because I only tend to see the people where it's been a problem. There may be people that I'm seeing who are cheating and they're just not telling me. Sometimes I hope they're not telling me because if they told me, then I would have an ethical quandary and I would, need to say, listen, we got to either share this or I got to stop seeing you. So that's an ethical quandary, as a classic ethical quandary as a sex therapist. A lot of times people will come to see me because there was cheating. That's a very big reason that people come to see a sex therapist, because there was cheating. But I have no idea. I just see the numerator of people who have an issue and I found out about it, but I have no idea what that denominator is like then. So I would rely on the studies, and obviously they're suspect.
One of the things that I've heard with the sex therapy space and other sex therapists online, you're talking about the idea of these arrangements being novel. The predominant idea, I think, that convinces a lot of people is that monogamy is not natural. What would be your response to that?
I always get in hot water when I talk about evolution, because you can tick off the left because they feel you're being reductionistic, and you can tick off the right because it goes against scripture. But let me just talk about evolution for a second. What we think evolutionarily is that as humans, we're like a minivan built on a race car chassis. the chassis, our part of the primate family, is a kind of the promiscuous part of the primate family with the bonobos and the chimpanzees and so forth. And sometime around maybe 6 to 4 million years ago, we developed a strong pair bond. Now, pair bond is not monogamy, but it's a pair bond and it's a strong thing. So all of our instincts to pair up. And biologically, species that develop a strong pair bond usually do it for one reason. It's because raising offspring has become difficult and required a lot of resources, and we need two people to do it. The classic example is birds. Birds are pair bonded. They pair up in the spring, and they do their thing, and some do it the next year and some don't. But birds are pair bonded and humans are pair bonded for the same reason. It's because to raise the offspring that are that helpless is a really, really difficult chat. This, as opposed to if you're a wildebeest, you just drop them on the ground and they're running around. So there's a strong pair bond, but we know from research in like penguins and stuff, like March of the Penguins and stuff, there's a lot of screwing around in the penguin world, even though they're pair bonded. So the pair bond in itself doesn't prevent cheating. I have a feeling that what really, really stuck the final nail in the coffin of cheating was the invention of language. I don't know. Did you ever read was it Yuval Noah Harari?
Sapiens?
Yeah, Sapiens. Yeah. Harari. I'm embarrassing myself. He says that when you get the development of language, you get the existence of categories, which are purely imaginative categories. They don't exist in the real world, like marriage. Somebody comes up with a category of marriage, and now you can say, you have failed to honor your marriage agreement. No animal would understand that. You're pair bonded and you cheat when you can. But once you get these categories and you have language, then you get the growth of all these categories, and you get you and me sitting here, 100,000 years later, talking about consensual non-monogamy as a category. But all these categories, they don't really exist. They're really just creations of the human mind. So once you get that category that's created and it becomes strong and it becomes the basis of most traditional societies is monogamy. And I think the reason it becomes the basis is that it is a useful thing for creating stability, raising kids, keeping people from killing each other and getting jealous, and it just tends to be a good thing. And then what further happens, once you get the advent of religion, it becomes a spiritual thing. So at least in the Jewish scriptures, the famous Rabbi Akiva said that all the scriptures are holy, but especially the Song of Songs. And the Song of Songs, as you know, is some kind of an erotic love song. It's parts that are really hard to understand. And so the traditional interpretation is that it equates the love of a person for their partner with the love of a people for their creator. And that's a beautiful analogy, and that really is very, very meaningful. I find it a very meaningful analogy because both require an act of conscious willingness. They're not automatic. So I would say monogamy requires an act of conscious willingness, and it's something which one hopes would be a meaningful thing, but that's, I guess one choice of many. So is it unnatural? Yeah, I would say, is monogamy unnatural? I would say yes, in the sense that all intellectual constructs are unnatural. 100,000 years ago, before language, they didn't exist.
Well, what's interesting, going back to what you were saying earlier about the viability of certain partnerships in an ownership type world, I might have a cake that's in front of me.
Yeah.
It might be natural for me to just eat that cake over and over and over again. And so I think that's interesting if you think about that from an argument type standpoint, is that people are struggling with their own impulses and desires and their attraction maybe towards other people. And so you hear somebody come out and say, well, monogamy is not natural. So that validates whatever state that they feel. But it is also natural. We have all these other impulses where if you were to eat that cake every single night for the next month, it probably wouldn't lead to like a good destination. I don't know what you think about that sort of.
Yeah, I think the whole
reasoning or
natural thing is really, really weak. Because I mean, nothing we do is natural these days. Shoes are not natural. Air conditioning is not natural. I could get toilets are not natural. Basically nothing. Living in this density of people is not natural. We left the natural world behind a long, long time ago. I think what it all comes down to is what's meaningful within a culture and a civilization. And I can't imagine that monogamy will cease to be meaningful, because I really think it's part of our nature.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier the spiritual thing, and I think also people get confused about these takes that they hear about evolution, and then a more spiritual religious view to this of like, are we meant to pair bound, or are we meant to be monogamous in that sense? Will that ultimately lead to our flourishing, even if the desires that we have internally don't match up with that in the moment? But if you observe human behavior, it does seem like there's sort of a disconnect. We were talking about Helen Fisher offline.
Okay.
She wrote that the human animal seems to be cursed with a contradiction of the spirit. We search for true love, find him or her, and settle in. Then, if the spell begins to fade, the mind begins to wander. Monogamy and adultery are fair. And I thought this was interesting because she was a famous anthropologist who studied human societies throughout history. And she's just observing that when we get transfixed on one person, it's like we kind of do want to be monogamous with them, and then we latch onto them. But then we have any of these sorts of wandering feelings. I mean, do you sense that in some of the clients that you have?
Totally. I'm glad you asked about this, because it's a very practical part of being married. Famous sex therapist who I quote a lot in my book, Avoda Offit, who's now deceased. She wrote somewhere, based on, I guess, her own musings, she said the average married person falls in love about 6 times between the time they get married and the time they die, or the time they get unmarried. Being married doesn't keep you from developing a fascination with another person. This was this woman you mentioned at the beginning, who was bored in her marriage. She becomes fascinated with this other guy. She just can't get enough of it. He writes her an email and she gets excited. And, it just becomes, a passionate thing. That happens. That happens when people are married. And the question is, what do you do about it? So, what I usually tell people, sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully, is I like to refer to the 10th commandment, kind of traditional, which is in Hebrew, lo tachmud, which is don't covet. And the big question is, compared to all the other commandments, is what does it mean? I mean, we know what don't kill means, we know what, don't make an idol is, but coveting, what is coveting? And there's I think it's a misconception that coveting means you shouldn't desire. To me, that would be Herculean. I mean, how could anybody do that, is not desire, unless they're like the Dalai Lama or something, and I'm sure even he has trouble with it. The traditional Jewish conception of coveting is that you do desire the other thing, but you know that it's not yours. So the example I use in my book, you got a Toyota, it's a nice Toyota, you drive your Toyota, your neighbor moves in and they're driving a Ferrari. And you're looking at that Ferrari in his driveway. And you definitely desire that Ferrari. You would love to have that Ferrari. But you tell yourself, hey, it's not yours. It's like a kid in a toy store with their mom. And mom says, you can have one toy. And the kid says, okay, I got my toy. And the kid says, I want that one too. No, you can't have that one. We can't afford that one. I can't afford a Ferrari. It's not yours. And the kid learns that it's okay to have the desire. You don't want to shame the kid for wanting the other toy, but you just say you're being a good parent. In psychology, we call this limit setting. You're just limit setting. It's not yours. Very, very simple. It's just not yours. Can't do it.
Do people, so I feel like that requires an assumption that people have had these sorts of conversations about what it means to be married, what it means to be in a monogamous relationship.
Right.
And so, I mean, that's why
usually they don't.
That's why it seems like communication itself seems to be an issue when it comes to sex, or even the structure of a relationship, because there's all these different lines of what actually constitutes as cheating.
Right. I mean, I guess the general topic at a wedding is, and forsake all others.
Yeah.
So most people, and this has been pointed out a lot in the consensual non-monogamy community, is most people don't really have a monogamy agreement. What constitutes the monogamy agreement? I think a good way to do it, which is very, very simple, and I like simple. We sex therapists, we're very simple-minded people, is you don't do anything that you wouldn't want your partner to know about. Just really simple. And so if you're, having dinner with an attractive stranger and you're enjoying being with the attractive stranger, and you desire the attractive stranger, are you going to arrange another dinner with that stranger? No, that'd be a silly thing to do, because you'd be just venturing into dangerous territory. So why you're not going to do that?
What do you feel like we're really looking for when we cheat? Even that example that we talked about at the beginning, what do you feel like we're really looking for?
Great question, because it gets into something that we haven't talked about yet, which is what we're really getting when we have an erotic relationship. I've thought about this for a long, long time, and erotic feelings and arousal are kind of odd. They're exciting, but they're also kind of relaxing at the same time, and they're fun, but they're not like a ha-ha kind of fun. Mm-hmm. There's a seriousness to it too. They're fun and serious at the same time. They're exciting and relaxing at the same time. They're gentle usually, but there's also this kind of ruthlessness to really good sex. So they're gentle and ruthless, fun and serious, and exciting and relaxing. And all of a sudden it hit me, all these emotional silos are the emotional silos of adult life. But in infantile life, those silos don't exist. It's all just mushed up and mixed up. And so I believe that erotic experience is a re-evocation, or you might say a memory, of something in infantile experience, which on some kind of nonverbal level is remembered. So that when it's a teenager and experiences erotic pleasure with another person, you've been there before. You've seen that before in the people who've held you and rocked you and fussed over you and told you you were wonderful, and especially who enjoyed you, because that's the real turn on. I always say this is like a mother enjoying her baby's feet. You see a mother with baby's feet, they're thick and and you just want to kind of gnaw on them and so forth. Mother's not doing that to give the baby pleasure. Mother's doing it because it gives her pleasure. But the baby is into it because the baby is tickled pink that somewhere in this weird universe, there is somebody who really enjoys them. Yeah. And so one of the things that I think about the most, I think about this a lot, is that we're wanting to be enjoyed. I always tell people this is the ticket to if your relationship is dominated by technology. Just remember your technology, your little instruments and electronic devices, equipment, it can't enjoy you. Your devices can't enjoy you. The only one thing you can enjoy is your partner. And we all really want to be enjoyed. And what does happen in a marriage is that people forget to enjoy each other. It's like if you're a parent, the things that you have to do to your child, you have to, keep them safe and keep them dry and feed them and so forth. But if you forget to enjoy them, you're forgetting something really, really important, because the kid needs this sense that they're enjoyable. So a big motivation for cheating is that the person's spouse has stopped enjoying them, because that is a raw hunger that people experience. Somebody to enjoy me. So now if somebody at work enjoys you, whoa, that's very, very attractive. I think there's some others that sometimes sort out a little differently between men and women. I think most women, and I talk about this a lot in the book, I lost some publishers over it. Most women have a raw need to be desired, which I think most men can't exactly comprehend. Most men may like to be desired, but most women, they need it. I hear women in my office talking about this all the time. Yeah, we have sex. I don't really feel like he wants me. I don't feel like he's in the sex meetings. They show the videotapes of rats, how the rats do it. The female rat just kind of wanders in front of the male rat and he chases her, and she runs away and he keeps chasing her. And the women in the audience, they get up and they go, yes, 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 yes. That's what we want. We want to be chased. We want to be desired. Somebody really wants us, like a romance novel. Usually the plot is that there's this guy for whom the heroine of the romance novel is heroin. He just can't do without her. And he's like Christian Grey. He's running a $2 billion deal, and all he can think about is this woman that he's obsessed with. And most women would see this as that's like catnip. So
you see that in film often. I mean, I've seen that depiction in film.
Yeah.
Many times. There was a movie with Adam Sandler, I think about 10 or 12 years ago, but there was the woman who went on Ashley Madison, which is like the cheating website. And she was just getting such a thrill out of the desire of these other people. And then she would go home to him and he was just kind of like aloof and like whatever. And I mean, I think that again circles back on the thing that we're talking about up top with sexual boredom and the fire that's lost in a relationship. And I just like, how do you prevent that from happening? Like the loss of fire, the loss of even being pursued in a relationship? Because I mean, I mentioned up top that there are so many things that might influence why that is now happening. Yeah.
One of the things that in heterosexual couple influences it is that men's sexual needs tend to be more limited. They don't really need a lot of variety usually, whereas women usually do. And guys tend to be kind of inert once they're satisfied. And women tend not to be inert once they're satisfied. So a man's kind of natural tendency towards inertia is galling to most women. They want a guy who's up and doing things. And I see a lot of women in my office worrying a lot when their husbands retire. Wait a minute. What's he going to do? What's he going to do all day? He's just going to hang around? You know, it's just not sexy. So a woman wants to see a man in a state of action, doing something, ideally chasing her. I do believe that most women, if they do experience a partner mindfully and with full attention in a state of awareness, experiencing them and experiencing turn on, that's usually enough. But few guys know to do that.
One of the things that I was somewhat perplexed by was when you talked about in your book that sex should be easy, right?
Yes.
So you have this whole world with sex therapists that are pushing back against the idea that like sex should be effortless in the way that we see it in the movies, at least, that it's just automatic and effortless, doesn't require communication. And so this idea that
How come I'm saying the opposite?
Yes.
Yeah. I think a couple of reasons. One is I see so many people who are doing all these things to try and work on their sex life, and it doesn't do anything. And they've got this idea that you should kind of figure it out and figure out how to make it work and so forth. And you're talking to the adult mind, and that's really not where it's at when it was sex. Where I was going before is that sexuality, sexual arousal is really an infantile response. And if you're not regressing to somewhat of an infantile level, you're missing something. So, I see recommendations in a lot of other sex books where it says, sexual relationship takes work. You really got to work on your sexual relationship. I don't know what the hell they're talking about because I can't imagine the infantile sexual mind understanding that at all. Not only that, I'm not sure what they would work on. Maybe communication. It's one thing I could think of. Maybe they're working on communication of what you really like. I'll go for that. But the idea of work seems to me antithetical. I always say, life is difficult. Sex should just be easy. Once you get into that state of awareness, you won't want to think too much. And the other reason, which I think is a deep reason, it's something that doesn't get explored enough these days, is that women, as a generalization, tend to be much more interested in putting in work in the relational sphere. It's meaningful. Let's do the communication. And most men are interested in putting in work in lots of other spheres, like the technical sphere, but not necessarily in the relational sphere. And so the idea of working on yourself or working on your relationship, I think is a little foreign to the male mind. And just first person, it's a little foreign to my mind. Biographical detail, hopefully not totally inappropriate. My mother was a therapist, and very good one, actually. And when I was growing up, she would say things that really confused me. She would say, "Steve, you got to work on that." And I would go, What are you talking about? I don't even understand the concept. I never understood the concept. And so maybe as a reaction, I went and wrote a sex book about how you don't have to work on anything. You just shouldn't work. It should just all feel good. So maybe it's a male perspective. I'm one of the very few male sex writers. Most sex writers and sex readers are women. Women kind of own this space. In the 21st century, the sexual space is a female space. Very odd, two men sitting here under a light talking about sex. You don't see that very often.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke offline about how Ian Kerner was on this podcast, and so he was one of the only other ones. That
The women own sex in the 21st century. It's very, very interesting.
There's two things. So, and related to the idea that sex is weird. So, if someone's mind starts to wander, right?
Yeah.
So they're bored in a relationship or they're tempted to cheat.
Yeah.
That must be sort of a byproduct of the fact that sex is now started to feel like work. Am I getting that correctly?
No, I don't think so. I think you could be having great sex with your partner and your mind could still wander.
Okay.
But let's go with it. Let's take that situation.
Well, I'm just wondering about, because it feels like there's a natural progression in a relationship where sex does become work, right? So let's just say
never. If it becomes work, don't do it. Yeah, no, it's not work.
What if you just had kids?
Still not work. Absolutely not. It would never. You want to make sure it never becomes like work. Or I would say, if you're using the word work, find another word. Find another word that doesn't have the connotation that's so conventional or adult. Because, you spend your life working. You don't want sex to be working. So what I prefer, as I've often said, over the past hour, is just conscious, intentional, but it's a turning inward.
Well, I think an important idea to address, probably off the top here on this, is the idea of sexual. In the beginning of your book, you open up the idea of having a sexual self and sexual feelings. And so if we were redirect that based on the examples we talked about in the beginning of, like, you want to be in this sort of flowy state, how would you explain to someone what their sexual self is? Because I feel like that sets a tone for basically everything.
I would say it's that part of you which goes from your earliest experience of a fusion of the emotional and the physical and what will later become the spiritual, that consisted of being held and rocked and fussed over and told you were the most important person in the world and that you were utterly wonderful and that everybody was just enjoying the heck out of you. And tuning in to the echoes and the memories of that in your own mind and consciously being willing to go there with another person and to enjoy them in the same way.
Because it seemed like there was something sort of almost, you call it infantile, it almost seemed like primal about what is it we're actually desiring out of a sexual encounter.
We're desiring to feel turned on. That's it. We're desiring to get into that space. And that space of feeling turned on is an infantile space. And I consider it the equivalent of going on vacation. Because, you go on vacation, what are the key aspects of going on vacation? You go to the room, you don't have to clean it. Somebody cleans it every day. You go out, you don't have to cook. Somebody cooks for you. They take things away. They've got an activity planned for you. You don't have to plan the activity. You're taking a vacation from adult life, essentially. And I think on some level, sex should be the same thing. It should be a vacation from adult life. I guess maybe, does that make it a little clearer?
Yeah, I mean,
I feel like
I've often heard that sex.
I feel like I'm not convincing you yet.
No, well, because I've often heard, it's just, I've heard so many different things from the sex therapy space. And then also I've heard this.
We're a diverse space.
Yeah. And then I've also heard the fact that sex is also about connection. Would you say that?
It's about selfish connection.
What do you mean by that?
Well, one of the reasons I was motivated to go to all the trouble to write this book is there was so much out there that I've passionately disagreed about that I was reading. For instance, you read a lot in magazines and books about, there's a woman named Margot Anand, who wrote lots and lots of books. I don't know if she's still working or writing. And she talked about how to give your partner a magnificent experience, how to stroke and stimulate your partner so that they would have a magnificent experience. And a lot of people very, very fond of her work and would do this kind of thing. And I always found the whole concept utterly boring. And in my office, people would come into my office and say, I'm bored out of my mind. They're just stroking and trying to give me a magnificent experience. There's no passion in it. They don't want me. This is all for me. And I always, do a thought experiment with my patients. I say, okay, you're offered two hypothetical lovers in an abstract space. Mm-hmm. One who is going to give you a magnificent, sensuous experience, and the other who finds you just utterly sexy and so turned on to be with you. And almost everybody would take that second one because we all just kind of want to be enjoyed that way. So, as I say in the book, passion is selfish because little kids are selfish. That's all they know. They don't learn generosity until they're in kindergarten or something. And so that's a later layer. So if we're really getting back to the profound levels, we're going to be talking about something that's really selfish. And the magic is if you're selfishly enjoying your partner and they love that you're selfishly enjoying them and they're selfishly enjoying you, that's as good as it gets. But it's a connection, but it's a selfish connection.
Yeah, I mean, reading your book, there was so much to me that made sense if you really think about why people enjoy highly passionate, erotic types of sexual encounters. It feels like it comes back to that. But the confusing part—
I feel like I'm still not convincing you.
No. I think it is convincing. I think for me, I'm trying to figure out why there's so much focus. But you said that you wrote the book in reaction to.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to figure out why there's so much focus on these other areas. And is there nuance or is there semblance of truth in some of the things that they're saying about
obviously
the focus on pleasure and stuff like that?
Obviously,
and where does
there
that
is
kind of fit together like a puzzle?
Yeah, obviously there is. And probably I'm looking to redress an imbalance that I see, which is such an emphasis on the creation of pleasure for the other and a neglect of what I would call the narcissistic element of sexuality. And I'm not talking about pathological narcissism. I'm talking about healthy narcissism, the kind of with the natural thing that kids have. They're little fountains of healthy narcissism. Me, I want it. That's passion. Passion has got to be like that. So I always joke with patients that, no romance novel ever has the hero rip off the heroine's clothes and then say, now tell me how you like to be touched. And he just consumes her. He just enjoys her like a croissant, and if you talk to women, they'll go, yeah, that's what I want. And I found that was lacking. And Ian and I talk about this a lot. He talks about this too, that there's been this kind of almost a taming. There's been a taming of the sexual impulse in the literature, as it's all about pleasure, and it's all I don't know. So there's been a niceification of it, and I think it misses the intensity and the regressive aspect.
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of these things get entangled with like kind of political ideals of feminism or patriarchy and like all these different. I mean, you gave it a title, conventional sex trip, maybe traditional gender roles when it comes to a sexual relationship. Yeah. What's interesting to me is that when we had Vanessa Marin on here, she told this story about a feminist who wanted her husband or her partner to be extremely assertive in their sexual relationship.
This is everywhere.
And so it seemed like what she wanted was at odds with some of her other beliefs.
I think it's because her beliefs have swung in a way which attempted to clean up some of the social and cultural mess of patriarchal society, with all the negative consequences towards women. But this is ordinary every day. That woman is not an exception. Most women that I talk to, when the bedroom door is closed, they want the guy to be, if not a beast, at least fairly assertive. 50 Shades of Grey sold 150 million copies, and the guy is like a sexual, almost a predator. There's that predatory male quality, which they want, in a guy who really does appreciate them and really does love them and they can trust and all this other good stuff. So I think there is a bit of a balance or a dialectical kind of quality with this kind of thing. I always thought it wasn't accidental that 50 Shades of Grey was written in 2012. Came out in 2012 because it was the Obama administration. You know, it's a famously egalitarian marriage. They seem to be considerate and they're good communicators and so forth. And you had something that bubbled up to the surface, which is, I want something raw. I want a guy to really take charge.
Yeah.
And now in our era, where we're in a more authoritarian era and we have authoritarian leaders, I don't think 50 Shades of Grey would be written. It was a bubbling up, a resurgence, or something to redress something in the soul that was saying, you know, we've kind of sanitized everything too much.
How would you? So, I mean, if you look at a relationship as a whole, you have the non-sexual parts, if you want to say that about a relationship, and then the sex life. For someone who's listening, who's struggling with the idea, how would you separate these different compartments of like what actually happens in the bedroom, the sex life versus patriarchal ideas of control and oppression and like all this other stuff? Maybe that helps them see that more clearly if there was some sort of differentiation between what
here's how I would put it. I think people are reacting to what we call masculinity 1.0. And masculinity 1.0, the average guy from 100 years ago, he didn't know what a clitoris was. He didn't really get the concept of women having orgasms or really wanting them or really needing them. He was just fairly ignorant, and all he was after was his own pleasure. So that kind of selfishness, which is not a connected selfishness, I don't think anybody wants to get us back to that era. Today, most couples in my office, I would call masculinity 2.0. The guy has read books on where clitoris is, and he's talked to Ian Kerner, and he knows exactly how to pleasure a woman. Ian wrote this book, She Comes First, the thinking man's guide to pleasuring a woman. And I thought, oh, Ian, you almost had it. It was the thinking man's guide to enjoying a woman. You should never give somebody oral sex. You should take oral sex. That way she could just say, oh, he's happy. I can do whatever I want. Otherwise, it's pressure on her to enjoy it.
Which could be a form of devouring if you're very into it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. So, but I always say, don't give somebody oral sex. Take oral sex. So masculinity 2.0 is the guy who wants to be egalitarian, and he wants to be considerate, and he wants to be a good communicator. And in the process, sometimes you swing a little bit too much the other way. One of my favorite sex writers is a woman named Carly Sciortino. She wrote a book, unfortunately titled Slut Ever. But it's a great book. And in it, she has this memorable line. She says, I don't think any woman ever gives herself an orgasm thinking about what a great listener her husband is. So there is something that most women, I think, that I talk to, and it's a generalization, and I could be, pilloried for this, but most women do want a man to take charge in the bedroom, to take the initiative, to make the decisions, so she can just surrender. I talk to a lot of women. I say, what's the verb? What do you want to do in the bedroom? She goes, I want to surrender. I want to just surrender to somebody who's worth surrendering to and who knows how to take charge. I believe that most women that I talk to, even in the 21st century, even in a more or less egalitarian marriage, want those things from their partner outside the bedroom too. They want the guy to take charge. They want the guy to make decisions. They want him to lead. And the quality of leadership is something that a lot of guys don't understand, that's what women tend to crave. It's a generalization. An example, Sunday afternoon. Woman says to her husband, what do you want for dinner? And he's thinking like a guy. And he gives a guy's answer, which is, I don't know. What do you want for dinner? I don't care. Whatever you want. Wrong answer. Because what she's really asking is, I want you to lead. I want you to figure out what we're going to have for dinner, and I want you to make it happen. Because I've been making things happen all day long, all week long, all month long. I've been making things happen for the kids and the family and the house and everything, and I want you to lead. So I believe that the average, well, it's not a belief, it's an observation, the average heterosexual woman that I talk to in my office, what she wants is she wants to be heard and listened to, and she also wants for there to be times when the guy will exert leadership. Yeah,
I mean, some of it is, there's a lot of words that have associated meanings, and I mean, you
could easily get in trouble talking about this.
Yeah, so you said the idea of work, find a different word for that because it has associated meaning. And I think there's a associated meaning with what like lead means and like a oppressive type of thing, but you're talking about more of like of assertiveness, a decisiveness, kind of taking what you want.
Well, I would say being able to be dominant without domineering.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no one would want a man to be domineering, but dominant. There are depths to heterosexual relationships, which I do believe go back, to the dawn of time, that we don't exactly quite know what to do with. I'll give you an example that's relevant to our discussion. BDSM. People talk about BDSM like, oh, this is some advanced form of lovemaking because it doesn't involve intercourse necessarily and that kind of thing. And there are BDSM groups and so forth. Mm-hmm. And talk about BDSM as if this is like a whole new creative space, which sometimes it is if you're into that kind of thing. But when I talk to people who are either into being dominant or submissive, overwhelmingly, it's the women who are into being submissive and who want the man to be dominant. And when I talk to men who are dominant in whatever fashion, they tend to be very popular because very, very many heterosexual women have a bit of a potential to enjoy something a little submissive. Mm. Whereas a man who's wired to be submissive, and there are many men like this, they either want to be tied up, or they want to be told what to do, or they want to be ordered around, or whatever, or they want to be in some kind of passive, sexually submissive situation. This does not go well in the heterosexual world. It's very rare to find a woman who tolerates that or who enjoys it. It goes against something in most people's heterosexual nature, that submissive men can't get a date.
You were talking about the fact that in your book that there are rules, unspoken rules that govern sex that most people are not aware of, and even some therapists are not aware of. Are you alluding to some of them? What are the rules?
Well, it's related to that. The phrase I use, and I struggled for a long time to figure out what to call this thing, and I eventually ended up calling it the conventional script. Mm-hmm. It's the conventional script for lovemaking. He initiates. That's huge. Once he initiates, he leads. He's in charge of what they want to happen next. He's not waiting for her to lead. However, she's the prime object of attention. All eyes are on her. She's the principal object of desire. If you get a guy who doesn't initiate, that does not go well. Many women will initiate for fun in a passionate relationship, but if they're initiating all the time, they end up in my office. That woman is very, very unhappy. I always tell men, I say, it's like a game of tennis. It's always your serve. Always assume it's your serve. So there is something in the conventional script, and I don't know, I'm not going to talk nature or nurture or judge it or anything. I'm just telling you, I don't make the news. I just report what I hear in the office, is that heterosexual women, who by and large are the guardians of the conventional script, they make sure that conventional script gets followed. They want to be initiated with. They like to dance, but they also like to be asked to dance. Very, very important. And once initiation occurs, they want to be with a guy who knows what he's doing, who's not fumbling around, who's not waiting for them to figure out what to do. He's got a plan. 50 Shades of Grey, he had what they called the red room of pain, where he would take her into his red room of pain. He knew exactly what he wanted to do in that red room of pain. Every time, he already had a plan. So he was a dom. To be a dom, you have to have a plan. You have to know what you're doing. And there's something about that dom energy that most heterosexual women in my office describe there's a piece of that they might appreciate, to one extent or another. And so, guys who don't follow the conventional script lose. So a guy who is passive, who waits for his partner to do things or think of things, he's got a very, very unhappy partner. Women who are married to passive men, it's huge in my office. A guy who is by nature kind of passive. If he has a woman who is more assertive or active than he is, that's a recipe for trouble because it goes against the conventional script. Yeah, a guy who wants a lot of attention in bed goes really against the conventional script. The woman should have all the attention. It should all be about her body and how her body is turning him on.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, when I've over the past probably over the past 5 years or so, I've been kind of studying more of the literature around sex and the science behind it. And what I found to be interesting that is kind of supportive of what you're saying is, even from a biological standpoint, it seems like there are differences when you go to, if you want to call it sex drive, and what Emily Nagosi has kind of labeled the spontaneous desire versus the responsive type of desire, and that men typically tend to be far more spontaneously desire. They're just ready to go at any point, while women kind of require that kind of startup type of energy. And so there's like clear differentiators that have been seen there. And then the Masters and Johnson model, even how you would go through an orgasm, is interesting to me. If there are differences there where a man will peak really quickly and then go down, boom.
Yeah.
But like a woman could have multiple orgasms through a sexual encounter. And so I think it's interesting, even if some people find it to be taboo, is to talk about what are the biological, social, psychological factors that surrounds great sex and that make up for great sex, and how do we lean into that in a way that's like not seen as like an oppressive thing, but actually adds to the eroticism of a relationship.
So I think it gets into culture and what human culture is all about, because there is a tendency in progressive communities to want to do some revising of the basic cultural scripts. And one problem with that is that those basic cultural scripts developed in concert with people's biological natures. So the way it's usually expressed is that culture amplifies biology. Culture takes something which is a facet of human biology and it amplifies it and it institutionalizes it. So we're right to question it, but you can't go saying the genders should be the same. It's just not going to work. That's my strong feeling. In computer language, the male sexual response system is an or switch. I can see a breast or a behind. And either way, I'm going to see one or the other, and I'm going to get turned on. It's been said, and I think it's true, that the female sexual response, by and large, is an and switch. I need to feel desired. I need to feel safe. I need to feel comfortable. I need to feel a connection. I need to feel the man is masculine. I also need no socks on the floor. If he's left his socks on the floor, it's just, I don't get one of those things that I need. I gave a talk once called the sexual neuropsychology of socks on the floor. Very few men are going to get turned off by their partner's socks on the floor, but that can happen as a man carries a woman in a passionate embrace. So I think they're just fundamentally different kinds of systems. See, when you read Emily Nagoski, she's talking about women. So the whole book is about women. And we live in a female-dominated era of sexual discourse. And there's an unfortunate tendency to think that if we've described women adequately, that's going to describe the whole human species. And unfortunately, it doesn't. It's a little bit like in the 20th century when we had Psychology of Men. And it was a landmark event when Carol Gilligan came out with the book In a Different Voice, 1970-something. And she said, no. Women are different. We're a different voice. We're more relational. And it was a major, major idea. I think we need the same thing now in the 21st century to say, no. Men don't need to become more like women. They're different. They're men. They're not just big, hairy women. And so if you read Emily Nagoski's book, you get a great picture of what women are like. You get no picture at all of what men are like. They're really just very two-dimensional. Even in the stories, they're just loving, embracing, warm, accepting, terrific guys, or they're rapists. You tend to get that men have their own psychological quirks and so forth. So I believe that if you're just talking about quantity of sexual excitation, you're not getting the full picture, because there is a quantitative aspect. I think most studies have shown that most guys are masturbating more than most women, but it's a statistical truth. Obviously, there's exceptions. And if you don't be careful, the exceptions are going to flame you on Amazon. But, everybody knows they're exceptions, just statistical truth. But they're also designed differently. So the male system seems to me, I'm just, this is my head, designed for target location. It's interested in finding something that, and you see this in chimpanzees, the rump swells at estrus and they go, they're all of a sudden they're motivated.
Yeah.
And that's a male response. It's an or thing. I see one thing and I go for it. And the female system seems to be designed differently. It seems to be designed to take many more factors into account. I read Emily Nagoski as a man, and she has a whole section which is beautifully written on context. What is the context of a sexual experience? And she has instructions for people who want to improve their sexual experience. Think of the contexts in which you felt most aroused. Think of the nature of the relationship, the nature of the setting, and all different aspects of context. And I read this and I go, I hear it. It sounds reasonable, but I've never experienced it. I go, to me, it's just if a woman looks sexy, they look sexy. And so they're fundamentally different heads. And I think the genders are just so fundamentally different in that regard. I go to sex therapy meetings and people say, yeah, men are into context too. And I go, I don't think so. I've been a guy my whole life. Maybe a little bit, but not.
Do you see like far majorities you worked with like 1,500 couples or whatever.
2,500 actually.
2,500 couples
over
the past 30 years. So have you seen exceptions to this where it seems to be reversed to the desire? It always follows this.
Yes. There definitely are exceptions. These are statistical statements. These are generalizations. And I'm as guilty as anybody who makes a generalization. But if you don't make the generalization, you lose an important nugget of reality, because the vast majority of couples that you're going to be seeing in the office, the woman is going to be very sensitive to context and the man, not so much.
If people are trying to understand the landscape of the types of information that they hear online, you obviously are in the trenches. You've seen all these couples over all these different years. What is the context between all these people that write these books? Are they studying things in a lab? Are they not in front of real couples? Like even the emergence of certain ideas or theories on how sex works, or how to have great sex, it's just like there's just so much information now.
Right.
Which is why I think some of your ideas are pretty revolutionary. So
they're definitely contrarian.
Yeah, they're contrarian, but how would you help people frame that if they're coming across information that would seem to be at odds?
There's no good way to do that, because if you give people information, very often they're going to believe it.
Yeah.
I guess my experience is just having had the privilege of, talking to 2,500 individuals and couples over the years. I'm just giving you the news as I've, I'm just reporting it. But it's obviously filtered through my mentality, which is a male mentality. So it's a different head. And it's rare for a man to put into words what they really experience in a sexual realm. Women are putting it into words all the time. But for a man to try and do so is a challenge.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I was so excited to talk to you is because when I read the book, it did feel like you were reporting the news. It didn't feel like there was any sort of like agenda behind this. And it's like sort of, we shouldn't talk about these things, or we shouldn't say this, or we shouldn't want it to be this way. And it feels strange even when you have women that are predominantly driving the fact that they want these sorts of things to happen in their sexual encounters.
But they don't talk about it in public. Esther Perel has a famous quote. She says, most of us will yearn for things in the bedroom that we would protest against, yearn for things at night that we would protest against during the day. And she's talking about probably this archetypical dominance and submission kind of thing.
One of the strangest things that I've heard, which is still really hard for me to figure out, and there's sort of an example in your book of this, is women who have fantasies about, I wouldn't call it being sexually abused, but it seems like a common thing where it's like they lose sort of all control.
Yes, where they're surrendered. And
so that in itself is very weird that would be, like the fantasy that you have, and there was an example in your book of this where the woman was so offended and distraught by her own fantasy.
She hated her fantasy.
Can you explain that story?
Before we get into that story, let me tell you about the basic thing. As a generalization, I would say there are depths to heterosexual life that just waiting to be discussed and explored. And we're trying to find the words to express it. And we're doing so in an era where we're also trying to redress some of the legitimate grievances of, women who have been an oppressed portion of the human race for as long as there's been patriarchal society for hundreds of thousands of years. And so it's tricky. It's tricky. When I say the genders are so different, often I get the comment, wait a minute, no, they're very same. They're very similar. If you say they're different, then you're saying women, there's something wrong with women. I go, no, absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to counter the idea that there's something wrong with men. But there's still unfinished agendas from going way back. So it's a very contentious political environment.
What would you say about the sorts of arrangements of the men that complain they do pursue, they are being assertive, but they keep getting rejected, and she seems to be sexually unavailable?
Okay. So number of different kind of situations there. One is where the woman has lost all desire or responsiveness, which does happen. In my book, I have an example of a woman this happens to, and her sexual desire was never really that outrageous to begin with. It was like, you show her something good and all the and circuits are there and she could turn on and respond in an Emily Nagoski kind of fashion. But it was never a strong thing for her. And she has a child, and after she has a child, it's even less. She's less interested. She has a second child, and after she has a second child, it's gone. She'll watch an erotic or romantic movie and she has this feeling of like, what planet are these people living on? I have nothing. I feel nothing like that. So if that happens, doesn't matter how much the guy pursues her, nothing's going to happen. So that's a problem. That's one of the great unsolved problems in human sexuality. But let's say the woman does have desire. It's not that her desire has turned off, and the guy is pursuing her and she still rejects him. 99 times out of 100 in my office, she would say he's doing it wrong. She's evaluating his pursuit. She's saying, he wanted to do it that way. I didn't like that way. He wanted to do the housework, but that didn't satisfy me. He wanted to take me to this place, but I didn't like that place. He forgot what I said I really liked. I said I really like this, and he did this. I'm very disappointed. You do see this as a clinician. You do see marriages where, for whatever combination of reasons, the woman has developed a negative picture of her partner. Very often, if we put it into words, it's that she's lost respect for him. It's a very, very bad situation to be in when a woman has lost respect for a man for whatever reason. And I call it the male death spiral. Once a woman loses respect for a man, he's in the male death spiral, and he's trying this and he's trying that, but he's trying, and the trying can feel needy, and neediness is going to be a turnoff for almost all women. And so his neediness, his trying, his attempts, his earnestness, all those will be experienced with a negative sign attached to them. So this is a tremendous problem in sex therapy when a woman has lost respect for her male partner.
Seems very complicated to work through. I mean,
what I would say is we have.
He might say, "Oh, she never can be pleased."
He might, and it's a dialectic. That's one part of it, and certainly in the moment that's true. But the inner psychology of it is usually that she lost respect for him, and something has happened so that she perceives him now in a negative fashion. And once that happens, it's very hard for him to get out of it, because all his attempts will be seen as needy.
In this whole spontaneous, responsive thing, or the fact that we seem to operate differently with our sex drives, what if the male complaint is she complains that she has too many tasks, she complains that she's doing this with the kids, she's doing that, she's doing this, doing that, do that, and that is the reason why she was unavailable. And it feels like there's this laundry list of things in between actually like getting into the bedroom.
Well, that's epidemic, right? 21st century, if you ask what are the top 2 reasons that women lose desire, probably stress and exhaustion. For most women, desire, as Emily Nagoski, I think, very eloquently puts it, is intimately bound up with pleasure. And it's involved as kind of a passive pleasure that in one of Emily's situations, a person goes to a spa and they come back with a little more desire. So they get to experience pleasure. And so most women are working hard and they don't have enough experiences of pleasure. And so the stress and exhaustion is huge.
Non-sexual pleasure? Or just
any kind of pleasure. And remember that the female eroticism, in my view, if you believe what I've observed, is connected to all these different things. It's connected to food. It's connected to clothing. It's connected to surroundings and lighting and all sorts of stuff in a way that is completely foreign to the male mind. So if a woman is, there was an old blues song that said, women, they get weary wearing that same old dress. I could wear the same thing every day. I don't care. Steve Jobs wore the same thing every day. He didn't care. But a woman, she don't want to wear the same thing every day. She wants variety. She wants sensuousness. She wants pleasure.
We talked about the sex drive thing, but the other difference that seemed to be interesting with science was the Masters and Johnson model of kind of sexual response and how we go through orgasms and how a male might peak and then totally drop and then totally not be in the mood or turned on.
Right.
And then a woman might go through and she could have 1 orgasm and then 2 orgasm. And so the reason why I bring that up is because you're talking about pleasure. How big of an issue do you actually think the orgasm gap is in a woman actually not achieving orgasm in the context of their relationship? And is that in any way driving her desire to not want to have sex?
Oh, well, certainly there are many, many couples where there's no desire because sex is not satisfying. So just, as I say, I joke, the definition of a sex therapist is somebody spends all day hearing about bad sex. So there's a lot of bad sex out there where neither couple is really getting fulfilled or inspired or satisfied. And many women can have really good sex without an orgasm and they feel totally fine. But many women don't feel that way at all. They feel they have to have dessert. They want to have dessert. And without it, there's something lacking. It's known that in a hookup among people who are relative strangers, it's very unlikely that the woman's going to have an orgasm. I always recommend to guys after you've been sleeping with somebody for like maybe 2 or 3 weeks to say, what's your favorite way to come? She'll tell you. It's with intercourse or it's with oral sex or whatever it is. And then, you got the basic communication and it's important to her and you want to make sure she has one. That's masculinity 2.0. There's some good things about masculinity 2.0. So there's an orgasm gap. I mean, some of it is biological. It's just a lot easier for a guy to come usually. It's like everything else about men. It's narrower. Masculinity is narrower. Femininity is expansive. It's got so much to it. And, I love the narratives from transgender people where, there was a woman, Julia Serrano, who is a male to female. And she says, as a guy, an orgasm? Yeah, it was an orgasm. She says, as a woman, oh my God, there's no comparison. It's just much more of an enveloping experience. It goes on for longer. It touches all my senses.
This is after taking hormones?
Yeah, after being on estrogen. So
that's a really interesting observation.
Yeah, the transgender narratives are really, really interesting in this regard.
Yeah, because they've experienced
both. It's like the Greek myth of Tiresias. You know the myth? Mm-mm. Tiresias was a guy who got to be transgender through some god or goddess gave him the power to be the other gender. So he lived as a woman and then he came back to being a guy or something like that. And they asked him, they said, the question that would be in everybody's minds, who enjoys sex more? He goes, oh, no question. He goes, the woman. He says, the share of pleasure, 9/10 of the share of pleasure is the woman's. The man, he said, that little squirt or, whatever. It's nothing to compare. Now, every guy is afraid of that, because everybody is worried. Every guy is worried about the woman's erotic potential. Because every guy knows that a woman's erotic potential is higher than his. Her potential for pleasure may be limitless.
Because of the
well, that's one feature of it, is that
model.
Undulating orgasms kind of thing, the multiple orgasms thing. But beyond that, women in a state of pleasure is a huge thing. Men in a state of pleasure is not such a huge thing. I had a colleague, sex therapy colleague, who had a picture of himself in front of a fireplace, half naked with a glass of wine in his hand on a bearskin rug. And I thought, something about this picture just doesn't make sense. Guys are supposed to be out chopping the wood or something like that. It's a woman who luxuriate half naked on a bearskin rug with a glass of wine.
One of the more
pleasure is a female dimension. When I'm sorry to cut you off, but when the Greeks, when they came up with these intuitions about this Greek mythical gods, Aphrodite, goddess of love, she's a woman. So that's not mistaken.
How much does the actual length of an experience, a sexual experience, matter to a woman's satisfaction?
It depends on whether you've seen porn or not. Because in porn, the guy can last 60 minutes because that's the length of the porn shoot. And he's recruited because he has a very high orgasm threshold. So
he's taking things.
Even if he's taking things, usually these guys are recruited because they're like that. There are guys who are out at the end of the bell curve in terms of orgasm threshold. And so it really takes a lot to give him an orgasm. He's like a woman who needs a vibrator. Mm-hmm. So in the old days, we used to talk about this in the 90s before porn was such a big thing on the internet. And they said, how long should intercourse last? 5 or 6, 7, 8 or 9 minutes is really, really good. And so, but then once you have porn, it's just taken into a whole dimension because that becomes kind of the expectation. That's a whole deep subject we could definitely get into. But I would say, in my experience, my practice, one man's limited experience, a lot of it depends on what's the woman's prime best way to have an orgasm. And some women, as Ian said, there's the inner clitoris and the outer clitoris, and the inner clitoris is wrapped around the vagina. And the outer clitoris is that little nubbin that's covered by the clitoral hood. If a woman's greatest and most prized way to have an orgasm is with the outer clitoris, then she's likely to really, really enjoy oral sex. She can have an orgasm. The guy can then go inside. She can have another orgasm. And if he lasts 3, 4, 5 minutes, fine. At the other extreme is a woman whose prized and best and most cherished way to have an orgasm is through intercourse, and it requires a certain kind of rhythm.
Is that rare?
No, lots of women are like that.
Really?
Oh, a lot of women.
That's like another huge thing that has been taught like that. It's unlikely a woman would actually have orgasm through intercourse.
Well, I hear about it a lot. The estimates that I heard is about 75% of women need some kind of outer clitoris stimulation, and about 25% are able to orgasm just from intercourse. But that's as worthless as any other statistics. But I hear a lot mostly from guys who tend to have a low ejaculation threshold. So once they get to a 40, they're going to come, and they're married to a woman whose idea of a really, really satisfying orgasm experience is to have real driving, rhythmic, intense intercourse for 15 minutes. And she says, that's a magnificent orgasm, what I can have then. So they got a bit of a problem. So there's people all along the spectrum. And then you've got the ordinary thing where the woman does experience some turn on from intercourse, maybe not enough to give her an orgasm. And if here's the guy's body and here's his penis and here's her vulva, she gets on top of him on top and she grinds down on him so she can get that clitoral stimulation. So she's getting a blended orgasm and everybody's happy.
One of the more shocking things that Ian talked about was that during sex, the average man lasts 2.5 minutes to 6 minutes on average. And so, I mean, that's way lower than obviously what you would see in film or porn, or the way that it's portrayed.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I'm like, is that actually the most common thing that's happening, that people are having an orgasm that quickly?
I wouldn't argue with Ian about the statistics. So I think it's probably true. But most guys are doing things in order not to ejaculate quite so quickly. So most guys are doing some degree of stopping and starting, or they're kind of staying below the speed limit and trying not to get too excited. Now, they may not go as far as the old-fashioned thing of doing math tables in your head during sex, which is a bad idea because who wants to do that during sex?
Right.
What?
Well, that's going to be
It's work. It's going to reduce your arousal. I mean, the whole problem with guys who tend to have on the low side of ejaculation thresholds is they have to kind of almost create bad sex in order not to come too fast. So I don't like that at all. What I suggest for guys is to do motionless intercourse for the first 2 minutes. So you're inside, but you're not thrusting. Because the first 2 minutes of intercourse tend to be the most exciting because, it's like getting into a major league stadium for the first time and the lights and the grass and the teams and everything. And then after 2 minutes, settles down a little bit. That initial shock of excitement settles down a little bit. And after 2 minutes, okay, I'm all right. And then I want to do some limited penetration. But even then, I might have to stop a little bit. If a guy wants to really go for it and really have passionate sex and experience a strong feeling of intense arousal or doing a more exciting position and not ejaculate in 5 minutes, he usually has to take medicines. So that's what we usually do in the office. All of the serotonin reuptake inhibitors, your Paxils, your Zolofts, your...
Wait, that's really a thing?
It's a huge thing.
So you're saying that, so you observe that many men can't go past 5 minutes.
Of course not. Or they can only go by 5 minutes if it's somebody that's not turned on to, or they're in a position they don't really like very much. I mean, they're reducing their arousal in order to keep it. But if they really want to have passionate sex and last more than 5 minutes, then they're going to have to do something. And, in my office, guys have tried all sorts of things. They've tried numbing creams, which is crazy. When you numb your penis in order to have intercourse. And they usually do pretty well with just a as needed dose of, Sexless, citalopram, sertraline. This is all off label. These aren't.
How long does that make them last then?
Depends on what dose you take. If it doesn't give you enough of an effect, you take a higher dose. So it's an expectable dose related. It kind of raises your ejaculation threshold.
So do you feel like this is a trivial conversation or actually matters to a man's satisfaction, a woman's satisfaction that an encounter is long?
It matters a tremendous amount to couples. I've had several guys within the past year who tend to ejaculate very easily, and they're married to a woman whose thing that she cherishes the most is 10 or 15 minutes of really rhythmic, hard, pounding, driving intercourse resulting in an orgasm. Now they've got a problem. So in an ideal world, you would fill out a questionnaire about this before you date somebody. But we don't live in an ideal world.
Or they might not even know what they like before the questionnaire, or you're saying they do?
I don't know. But people have all sorts of odd matchings that you see. So in my practice, usually the most merciful thing you do is you give the guy a prescription for sertraline, and he takes a little bit more until he finds, wow, my threshold is up around a 60. I could be a porn star.
Is there techniques and things that you've worked through with men that will just naturally raise their baseline?
Nah.
Really?
No. I think it is what it is.
Wow.
I mean, a lot of guys who tend to ejaculate within 1 or 2 minutes or within seconds, let's say, they rely on round 2. So they'll be with a partner, they'll go in, ejaculate right away, and then they'll wait a half an hour, get hard again, and then they'll last as long as they want.
Yeah, I mean, Vanessa Marin's work, she talks a lot about the myths surrounding sex. And when I hear this, I think about that immediately because you just don't think of this as sex. Like if you're had a hookup and you're in a locker room talking about it with the boys or whatever, you're not going to be saying like, oh, it lasted 2 minutes.
No.
But if this is what's actually happening, it's like
this is a reality.
The public facing message of what a sexual encounter is actually happening and what's actually happening in a private encounter is like very different.
They've done studies in colleges of college questionnaires and so forth, and something like 95% of guys were worried about climaxing too soon. So all these medicines are off-label. They're labeled for depression or anxiety. They're not labeled for premature ejaculation. But they're used and have been used for decades. There have been over 30 published studies internationally of them being used, and they work for this purpose because they do, on an expectable dose-related way, they raise the ejaculation threshold. So because they're off-label, you can never see a TV ad saying, ask your doctor about new treatments for premature ejaculation. Now, in 2006, there was one. It came to the FDA. There was a short-acting Prozac that Johnson & Johnson bought the patent to, and they did a massive investigation. They did the phase 3 clinical trials. They showed that it helped guys not ejaculate too quickly. They had their TV commercials written, and the FDA said no. So for that purpose, if the FDA had said yes, we would be seeing for the last 19 years commercials saying, ask your doctor about premature ejaculation, and everybody would know about these medicines. But because they're off-label, people don't know about them. Now, is it a good idea or not within a couple relationship? I actually talk about this in the book. There's a chapter called The Mysteries of Intercourse, and it talks about this. It's called Sex on a Stopwatch. And my own clinical algorithm is if it's a balanced, healthy relationship where couples love each other, they're turned on to each other, and she's just a little frustrated because she wants this kind of orgasm and she can't get it with him, and he could take a pill and he could give it to her, fine. On the other hand, if it's one of those relationships that we talked about where she's lost respect for him, where she doesn't like him, and he's just desperately trying to gain her approval, I don't love taking a pill for that.
The fantasies end of sex I thought was interesting because you talked about this quite a bit in your book. The example of maybe a woman who fantasizes about being controlled. Where do our sexual fantasies come from, and how do you know whether that's actually something you want to live out in real life or it's something that is just in the mind?
Oh, I would say you almost never want to live them out in real life. So I usually encourage couples to enjoy their sexual fantasies. Don't ever think of trying to live them out in real life because you'll probably be disappointed. And think many, many times before you ever tell your partner about them. Most people just don't tell their partner what their sexual fantasies are.
Is there a downside to that?
I don't think so.
Why?
Because you're entitled to some privacy in a relationship.
Doesn't that create more intimacy though? If you were to share,
you share your sexual fantasies.
Yeah,
I think there's always going to be some editing involved. If the guy in the fantasy was really your next door neighbor and so forth, you're not going to tell your partner about that unless you're just a very, very honest, open couple. And I don't think it's usually a great idea. I don't encourage people usually to tell their partner their sexual fantasies.
What are positive kind of examples of sharing, and then also maybe negative paths of like I shared and now this became a disaster?
Well, I mean, your benign sexual fantasies I'm fantasizing about that vacation we took to Aruba, and I fantasized that we were on the beach at night in Aruba and we were having magnificent sex. Beautiful. You can share that all you want, right? But if it's a fantasy that I fantasized about that couple that we were with in Aruba and I was with them and we were having a threesome on the beach at night, that's going to rouse jealous feelings in the other person's mind. It's usually best kept to yourself.
So where do sexual fantasies come from to begin with? What makes up our fantasies? Because if there's things that we fantasize about, like, what is that? That is so weird, or like I don't actually want that, but it still turns me on.
Okay. So I think you're talking about kinky fantasies.
Could be kinky.
If it's weird, I don't know why anybody would want that. I certainly wouldn't want to do that in real life.
Or there's very specific. Seems like maybe people fantasize about certain power dynamics, not in the BDSM way, but certain power dynamics or certain things that are happening. Mm-hmm. It's like very vivid type of things that you might be fantasizing about. And is that just all random chatter that's going on in your mind, or is there a source? Okay, so this is
a question that I remember we said we were going to come back to.
Yeah.
Because you'd asked me about the woman in the book.
Oh yeah.
And just we could flesh this out. So there's a woman in the book. She's Upper East Side housewife. And a perfectly normal person. And in order to have an orgasm with her husband, she has to imagine that she's been kidnapped and she's kept in solitary confinement. And her captor, is watching her in a way that she can't see him. He can see her and she can't see him. And she's aware that he's getting very, very sexually excited. And that's the fantasy. And she hates the fantasy because it's such a dismal situation. And she would never want that to happen in reality, but that's what gives her an orgasm. When a person has a kinky fantasy, they're kind of, as I think of it, roughly two extremes. And then there are all gradations in between. The two extremes, there are some people who just seem to be born kinky. There are people who, mostly men, is more common in men because male sexual nature tends to be a little bit more formed. It tends to be a little less flexible. And there's been a lot written about this. So a guy, it's a famous story, a guy 6 years old, he's wandering down the street and he sees an ad for Muscular Dystrophy Association or something like that with a kid in braces. And he gets turned on. Where'd that come from? He's got some kind of kink in his wiring. And that just happened to turn him on. I had a patient who got turned on at the corset scene in Gone with the Wind. Do you remember the beginning scene where it's on the southern plantation back in slavery days and the slave is pulling the southern belle's corset and she says, "Oh, mammy, don't pull my corset too tight." This guy got turned on. He was 9 years old. And so those kind of things, you think, it just must be just some kind of quirk in the guy's wiring. Because, guys have all sorts of quirky wiring. Male sexual desire tends to be a little fetishistic, breasts and butts. And they were just kind of, that's it, And so some guys, they want other things. They want feet. They want armpits. There's all sorts of varieties with male sexuality. Some guys want, to be tied up in corsets. So that's the one extreme. The other extreme is where there's something traumatic involved. You often see this with women because their sexual natures tend, on the whole, to be a little more flexible, a little more. What's the word? There's a famous line of research that calls female sexual fluidity. So they tend to be a little more fluid. So this particular woman who would fantasize that she was a captive in solitary confinement, she had all sorts of abandonment trauma growing up. So she often was solitary. And what the sexual fantasy does, as it frequently does in people who've been traumatized, is it eroticizes the trauma. So it kind of turns lemonade into lemons. It takes a situation of fear and abandonment and it adds some sexual pleasure. So now you're revisiting something that's evocative of the early abandonment, being captured nowhere, you can't find anybody who loves you. And there's some sexual pleasure, which is being lusted after.
That's so interesting how early childhood dynamics could be influencing. Because at first glance, it's like, how are these two things related? And then all of a sudden, it's influencing what you're fantasizing about.
Well, because sexuality is very tightly connected to the self. We talked about the infantile self and the developing and growing self, and you have something traumatic or disturbing in the development of the self, it's gonna get reflected in your sexual nature. But the other thing that I talk about in the book is, what do you do with that? And it depends whether you're talking to a sex therapist or a regular therapist. The average regular therapist would go, "Oh my goodness, this is a rich trove. Let's spend months or years exploring this and working this out, and hoping to kind of heal the trauma." A sex therapist will say, that's going to take a long time. People get very frustrated if something takes a long time to work out. I want to ask her more. I ask her, when do you use this fantasy? And she says, well, I'll be making love with my husband and I'll be excited. And then all of a sudden the excitement will disappear. Gone. Which is, many women describe that. Arousal just disappears. Where'd it go? I don't know. And when it disappears, she gets so frustrated that she turns to the fantasy because it's a kinky fantasy, and kink tends to be more powerful than vanilla. So with this extra kinky fantasy, she can get there. And so what I suggest to her is, next time it happens, if you could just be a little more matter of fact about it. Okay, the arousal went away. hit rewind. Now, what was I doing? How could I get it back? And she goes back to foreplay or whatever, and she gets it back. And okay, maybe she needs to come in to bring the fantasy in a little bit, but it's not that kind of intrusive, compulsive kind of thing. So essentially, we want her to make friends with it. We want to make friends with the fantasy. Oh yeah, there's that thing. It's fine. And that's usually the sex therapy path, is we want somebody to really focus on what's going on in terms of their arousal and treat their arousal in a more wholesome, gentle way.
One of the lines in your book in terms of sexual satisfaction and goals that really struck me was when you wrote, many people's favorite part of sex is that moment when the other person kind of loses control.
Yeah.
And then most people prefer lovers whose absorption in the moment makes them at least momentarily thoughtless. Most of us quite enjoy being hungrily devoured by someone we love, assuming they properly relish us first. I think a lot of the ideas that you're talking about, when I read that, I'm like, oh yes, that is the way things work. That is reality. And so whatever way that you're feeling about some of these concepts, to have someone be that immersed in you is like,
it's great.
I mean, you see that on the dating scene, like apart from sex, you want someone that really is like really into you. You love that. But then when it comes into the bedroom, it's like there's all these sorts of other conversations that are happening. But if you have that sort of sexual dynamic, that's almost like thoughtless, and that aura that's happening, I feel like that's what people probably want.
That's what people are going for.
Yeah.
They're going for that infantile state of emotional and physical fusion that is just like, it's the original stream that, as salmon, that's where we were spawned, and we're swimming uphill to get back to that. And we can't. We get a little taste of it on vacation, maybe a little time in peak experiences. But, the rest of the time, okay, we can sample a touch of it when we're having sex if we really do it right.
What are some like positive examples of people who had breakthrough? They came in, maybe they were fighting the, whatever you want to call it, the sexual, conventional sex script. And then now they've worked with you, they made it to the other side. The types of results that you start to see in other people if they just understand and accept the way that they're wired and start leaning into that.
Well, that's exactly it. It's the sense of acceptance. As I say in the book, acceptance is vitamin A. If you accept that you do have a desire to be selfish in bed, and you can make that be okay, that's huge. Many men touch their wife's body out of a feeling of, I want to touch her in a way that's going to be pleasing to her and that's going to get her excited. I begin my book like this. And the chapter is called Your Wife is Not a Lawnmower. It's not just a question of just like pulling the cord right to get her started, because that misses the whole point. There's a famous Christian sex writer named Kevin Lehman. He wrote a book called Sheet Music, excellent book. But I do quibble with him. At the end, I think it's at the last page of the book, he says, my prayer every time I go to bed with my wife is, please, Lord, let me find the thing that I can do to please my wife. And I go, Kevin, I'm not sure I really agree with you on that one, because it's a noble sentiment, but where the passion usually is in couples I see is being selfish. And I would say the breakthrough moment that means the most to me is when a guy turns to me and he says, I just realized for something. This is supposed to be for me. I'm supposed to get something out of this. I'm not just supposed to be trying to turn on my partner or be a good lover. So in Masculinity 2.0, I always say, when you touch your partner's breast, is it for your pleasure or for hers? And they go, well, for hers, obviously. Isn't that what I'm supposed to do? And I go, no. So what I think is we really want Masculinity 3.0, which is some kind of a hybrid of these things, but it's really in beta version. We don't really have it yet. It's not available in the stores yet.
So it's like your desire and kind of devouring of her is what will end up giving her pleasure anyway. So it's like a win-win.
At least the women that I talk to, providing you know the basics of what she likes and doesn't like.
So in terms of the basics, the four characteristics I've heard with great sex are trust, communication, attunement, and safety. What would you say about those four characteristics?
I would say those sound like a floor. You hear this a lot. Oh, sex, trust, attunement, communication, and safety. And I go, that's a pretty low floor, because there's nothing passionate there. There's none of the infantile, raw quality. that all sounds like something you could put in a corporate mission statement. It's not going to do it. That's just the floor.
What would we need to add on to that?
I would say a kind of selfish connection, cultivation of a sense of awareness, having chosen a partner who really turns you on, but lots of other things. I mean, that just sounds like a kind of a platform, and it's got the advantage. Nobody's going to object to it. Nobody's going to get triggered by it, but I don't think you're talking about great sex there.
I mean, so this was like really a masterclass in sex, and I think it's a perspective that a lot of people probably haven't heard before, but stands to improve their sex lives.
Well, it's clinically tested, so I just know from working with people that it does work, and also that it tends to work rather quickly. I probably see people in sex therapy a lot quicker than most people do. Most people get kind of stuck in the muck and the mire. And as a sex therapist, I tend to want to kind of bypass it and say, okay, how can we fix this? Because, sexual system being kind of infantile, it's a little impatient. And there's nothing more discouraging than being in sexual counseling for months and months and months. That's really discouraging. So people tend to be very, very hopeless and discouraged when they come to us. And Ian talked about this very poignantly. They're very hopeless and discouraged when they come to a sex therapist. They need something to give them some sense of hope. So I tend to want to work with couples fairly quickly on these things.
Yeah. We talked about what people are not saying out loud. And it really struck me that when I looked at all the reviews of your book, it was like most of the main people in the sex therapy field. And it's like, even if we aren't talking about these things out loud in these sorts of scripts, it seems like that in itself is kind of a co-assignment of a lot of these ideas that this is how things actually work. And if we could approach them from a way that isn't masculinity 1.0, as you said, and not 2.0, but a 3.0 thing where we can merge some of these ideas and get back to kind of the heart about what great sex is all about. I think it stands to improve a lot of people's sex lives.
I hope so.
So my last question is, if you could leave people with one thing, one truth about the erotic potential about a long-term relationship, what would that be?
Sexual experience, quality sexual experience that could move you and inspire you. It comes from your earliest experience of being loved and cherished and enjoyed and rocked and held and fussed over and given lots of attention and told that you're wonderful and treated like one of the most important people in the universe. And that's so precious that you really want to keep that in mind, that that's what you're going for. Now, sometimes you may experience a little bit of that. Sometimes you may experience a lot of that. You can't control that, but you always want to be open to it.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for coming in here today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Yeah. It's not often that I have uninterrupted time to talk about these things.
Yeah. So great. Thank you.